It was a surprise for Severus Snape to receive a second visit from Cilius Lupin in the same day. As the staircase above which his office was situated decided on this occasion to raise him up to it slowly as if a corkscrew, he replayed the announcement he had made in the Hedgewood staff room in his mind. Nearly all of the teachers were in agreement that the non-wizard students should return to their homes. One or two dismissed the idea that it was magic-related, but reluctantly agreed to logic when Neville explained the companion plant analogy at the evening staff meeting the day before, especially as it related to the children's safety. Snobbits targeted Cilius Lupin's policy again, suggesting that it had taken the health of non-wizards to show that it was a failure. As he approached the centuries-worn granite step, indented with many a headmaster's footstep so as to wear it into a dip, and the thought crossed Snape's mind too. Had it really taken all this effort to fail over a simple thing like health? Why had no one suggested there may be a health problem? Had such conditions in humans ever been rationalized before? If he were not careful and did not handle the situation well, there could well be a loss of trust with the ministry just at the time when confidence in its governance was vital to overcoming the extremism faced by conjurism. So it was a surprise for the headmaster to be greeted with the sight of the Minister for Magic, and for his opening sentence to be the same that Snape himself had thought just moments ago. As Cilius explained how he was going to handle the prophet and the communication to the non-wizard parents, as well as to the parents of the wizards who would remain. Nodding as if to silently credit Cilius for his strategy, he placed the unauthorized copy of Old Magic on his desk, thinking of Fraser Blewett at that precise moment in one of a fortnight's detention in the company of Minerva McGonagall, a point he made to Cilius once the wizard had finished. I would not have trespassed further on the same day, Severus, however, as the nature of Cecilia Lupin's letters concern you directly. Snape raised an eyebrow. Indeed? She is bold. Cilius held out the letter, addressed to himself at the ministry. The page he held out was one of over 50 she had sent in a bundle that week, detailing all that her colleagues were researching. The request, Cecilia had known, would provoke a certain measure of outrage with her brother-in-law. I mean, blood samples? Hair? Well, yes, fair enough. Lymph fluid? Snape analyzed the letter closely. Cecilia did indeed want to perform basic biological assays, to work from first principles as it were, on Remus's cure. What have you told her? Snape looked above the horizon of the letter at his counterpart. If he was annoyed, no one would have guessed. However, Severus Snape knew Cilius Lupin well enough to know that she had irked him. Nothing, as yet. I generally wait until a good week has passed before replying. Cilius held out a hand. How was Septimus when you took him to see Remus? Another week, and another week of his brother being ill. Cilius had many irons in the fire in terms of his recovery and cure, none of which were in play. He was still banking on a wizard cure. The less he had to rely on non-wizards, and science, both of which Cilius distrusted immensely, the more comfortable he would feel. He was grateful to see his father. He appears to be taking it pragmatically. It is the least we can do for the boy, considering he is without his mother too. Snape noticed the rankle and changed the subject. Regarding Cecilia then, do you intend to discuss the issue of intransmutable objects with her? Certainly not. Cilius shook his head. The least involvement she has in all of this the better. For whom, exactly, is this better? Cilius narrowed his eyes in the dim lamplight. Us. Which is why I believe contact of any sort would be putting the reciprocators, the ministry, the whole of the free wizard world at risk. It is no coincidence that Cecilia is on an island in the North Sea out of harm's way, especially considering the occasions she was here, Snape. It took a lot to ensure her damage was contained. Cecilia is at Durmstrang to isolate her? Snape frowned a little, glancing up at the previous heads. Does she do nothing worthwhile? Indeed. It is indeed a bonus to us all that I managed to conceive of a purpose for Cecilia Lupin. She works at the school teaching, and now, like us, Durmstrang has collaborated with peers from different schools and institutions. We have 2 such people, ministry chosen, that will be taking the positions at Durmstrang in due course. Cecilia appears to take a good deal of her time in reporting information to me about the teachers, teaching practices and research of her colleagues. Indeed, tomes arrive onto my desk on a daily basis. Thorough? Snape picked up his large quill pen and wobbled it a little between thumb and forefinger, the corners of his mouth turning upwards. Comprehensive, admitted Callias, almost annoyingly so. Yet she too states that she believes magic will be the answer, in the end. Snape frowned a little before folding his arms. Then I reiterate, Callias, that we should allow her access to the knowledge of intransmutability. When she begins work, when she analyzes results, there will be no doubt in her mind that. Out of the question. No doubt, Snape insisted, that something is not right. How long do you think it will take her to work it out? We already suspect that Dumbledore and Grindelwald know about the existence of such objects, one of which they believe was stolen in the raid on your office. Cecilia's employment letter. Indeed. And we have been at pains to keep the others close to hand. Snape's words finished and a vacuum of silence replaced them. Both wizards stared at one another for some time before Callias nodded. It is just this reason that I feel we can resolve a good many things at one stroke. A suggestion, one which should suit our needs. Indeed, Cecilia should be allowed access to something. She needs to be kept in check, and to leave from Durmstrang again will result in my imprisoning her in Azkaban. Make no mistake, Severus. My proposal is this. Cecilia should be given access to whatever she asks. She should carry out scientific analysis so she believes she has some purpose other than data gathering for me. Cecilia will then be highly likely to remain at Durmstrang at her own volition. But her actions should be guided. Guided? Yes, contained and channeled. You should resume your contact with Cecilia Lupin. Non-wizard science has proved valuable in the past. No avenue should be left untrodden, in the search for both truth, and a cure for Remus. Spoken like a true politician, thought Snape wryly. Then aloud, said, she can discuss science, and the link. She can have some contact with Septimus. Unthinkable. It is cruel, Callias, from the child's point of view. What harm can it do? In fact, she also has Remus's illness to deal with, as well as Septimus. She suggests we analyze several of the children, both wizard and non-wizard, to establish any changes to their metabolic processes. Why do you think this would be, Severus? The universal link, replied Snape, simply. Should they have changed their energy process rate on being at Hedgewood's, we would be able to conclude that Neville Longbottom's hypothesis of symbiosis is correct. Callias shook his head, Snape noticed, and smiled inwardly. There, Callias Lupin. No matter your power and machinations, your influence and pressure, Cecilia still is able to confound you. Aloud, he said, one of my own suggestions for you, Callias, was to seek agreement for communication barriers to be lifted. Partially. For staff only. It would allow it to be seen that we fully cooperate with the collaboration inflicted on us by Strasbourg. It would allow my staff to be more efficient at their day-to-day jobs. Do you realize how long it takes to walk around the castle to find my witches and wizards to impart news? And I expect that amongst each other my staff can save time too. A simple request to share resources or swap lessons results in them becoming cross when they can't find who they are looking for, when a flue fire would locate them in seconds. I see your point, Snape. Indeed, should you acquiesce to my request, then I shall be pleased to acquiesce to yours. Do we have an understanding? In the true spirit of reciprocation, Callias, I do indeed. It is a risk, of course, but a calculated one. As well you know, Snape thought to himself, grateful that he was indeed the stronger of the two of them when it came to occlumency. He would guess Cleus believed him, Snape, cynical towards him, but there was Hades' chance that he would allow his old adversary turned colleague the pleasure of knowing it for sure. What would be better, readers, then, from your point of view? The old place, as Cecilia shorthands it to in her mind to shield her from what-if thoughts that could no longer be, where the maniac Voldemort erupted quickly in a matter of decades, shocking rapidly and powerfully, imposing himself violently upon society? Or, here, the same feelings being conveyed with mistrust and misunderstanding over centuries, playing on the suspicions of many based on threads of things that all wizards knew started with a grain of truth? Is it better to have some notice, so to speak, like here? Or for it to be a shock like with Voldemort? That is, if what happened in the old place were to happen here. If it looks like a spade, and is used like a spade. But here, of course, there's always a defense to say that there is nothing in common with the here. What a stupid thing to say. A wizard called Tom Riddle, who died nearly a decade ago, had lived a regular, everyday uneventful life working for the ministry. The order, the reciprocators ... there and here ... would these events in any case have happened? Was this human nature at work? Probably. Two groups would, given time, find themselves at odds, and there were always those opposing the conflict. Readers ... what do you think? Inevitable or just past historical coincidences? Snape sat at his desk for a time after Cleus's departure, running the visit over in his mind. Cecilia. If you were to only know. If you knew your purpose. Like some very exquisite watch where the mechanism appeared to have no beginning and end, so were the events already in progress, begun by the master clockmaker himself, Albus Dumbledore, all those decades ago. He looked down at the letter on his desk, addressed to Cecilia and adorned with a gold postage stamp, which would have, the next morning, been a red pillar box in Shepthorpe. He had known it wouldn't take long for Cleus to agree a compromise, but he hadn't expected it to be this soon. He eyed the Queen's image absently. Maybe it was the complication of Remus, or the illnesses in the castle that had catalyzed his consent. He knew that Cecilia knew genetics was not his field of expertise, and it was with that sentiment he had opened the written dialogue within. Holding his hands over the letter, steam hissed, like an electric iron, and the envelope tongue peeled itself away. The samples which he pulled from his robe, and which had originally been intended for Nick Smith to analyze on his behalf, hair, lymph fluid and indeed blood, contracted themselves into smaller, denser matter, and he glided them between the fold of the letter page before readdressing the letter simply to Cecilia, wondering how much time was an appropriate amount to wait following the reinstatement of flu communications until he sent it to Durmstrang. 8,888,888. The mist was lifting. Cecilia, much to her surprise, was actually beginning to enjoy watching the Durmstrang students as they trained for Quidditch above the choppy seas. It was different to watching them over land, especially when one poor soul was made to dive underwater to retrieve the snitch he had missed, and had reappeared thoroughly drenched, clutching the tiny winged ball. No. Not enjoying. But the timeliness of the training coupled with the routine of working the week was a mental balm, something that made sense, even if routines, she knew, were just an illusion of control. Cecilia wondered if Septimus was playing Quidditch at Hedgewood's, with his lightning shot, whether the friends he had spoken about, in his beginning to be neater handwriting, played too, whether he was learning well, whether he was happy there. She had had to resist the urge to write back immediately to her son, an urge not dissimilar from keeping a box of luxury chocolates uneaten so they can be enjoyed over the course of several days rather than greedily at once. Cecilia had kept the letter in her cardigan pocket, rereading it every so often, recalling in her mind's eye the places that he was describing, wondering what it would be like if she were there teaching, rather than holed up here. And she had written back that morning, just after she had received official notification that collaborators in physical magic and animal behavior were to be coming to Durmstrang in order to exchange research. In it, Cecilia had spoken from the heart, despite knowing that even though the letter was for Septimus, it was likely to have been read by his uncle, and she had told him not to worry, to trust in Severus Snape and, above all, to enjoy his time at school there. "You will see me soon, beautiful," she had written, daring herself to do so. "I'll be there for Christmas." And, while buoyed with forthright determinedness from the first one had boldly, from Callias, written a similar requested collaboration with Snape and DNA samples to test, posting THM both quickly by owl before she had a chance to change her mind. As the choppy sea below struck rock and its waves broke like eggs, she looked at Septimus's envelope. Her last reply to him had included a hypothetical inference that some of the children at Hedgewoods were getting ill in magical environment, because of exposure to magic, a supposition she had also shared with Callias. Cecilia knew that magic had been affecting her so she could do magical spells, or at least appear to. This was probably the reason for her ongoing, never quite right state of physical being. There were no healers at Durmstrang, students disapparated, or so Cecilia was led to believe, and the students accessed help by means of a special pass to Strasbourg, the place to which so many, the cream of Durmstrang's selective alumni, yearned to pursue their careers. Which is why Cecilia had shrugged off her symptoms. Besides, it was unlikely that Callias would want to keep her here too long. There was only so much information she had provided and, with little influence from outside the school. Despite the collaboration law that had been imposed, the staff here, as one, had taken the tack of systematically reading and rejecting every single piece, a very neat and non-confrontational protest. Would that be enough? Following a wave with her eye as it formed near where Cecilia approximated the horizon to be her mind fixed on the problem which she knew she could not circumvent. How was it to happen? If she decided to make her own way back, Cecilia was convinced that Callias would keep his promise of Azkaban, or worse. The thought that had crossed her mind the other day was that, if she herself was Callias, she would probably cut her losses and return her beyond the veil. She would have done it a long time before now, too. So just what did Callias need her for? It wasn't just to pacify Septimus. Despite having such a sensitive side, Callias's ministerial duties would never spare his nephew should it be a matter of security. Cecilia looked at the letter again, which was now damp with precipitation and sea spray. She wiped it gently, save it smudging. Poor boy. Poor boy. It was plain to her that he was worried about Remus, probably her too. It wasn't what he was saying, more his concern over Julian that was intermingled with everyday events. She had to get back to him. Cecilia looked down over the parapet, her hips resting against the tower's crenulations so that she was looking directly over the Quidditch goals, their posts firmly fixed in the bedrock with the waves crashing around them. A black shadow felt as if it was pressing down on her. The coldness that she had begun to feel since her return seeped into her bones, her hands stiffened in the inclemency. It mattered little, the coldness she endured was always there, in her room where she had every available material on her body and over her bedspread, in the classroom on the occasions she had been ambushed to teach students. Cecilia had even had to abandon a lesson yesterday because her jaw was not under her control and chattered uncontrollably, so much so that she couldn't speak. Not that it mattered too much what she said, comprehensive for the students of course. Cecilia knew of the universal Linux science and lesson by lesson Cecilia had discussed it almost absently. She had become more tired, however Cecilia was finding it unceasingly difficult to shift such dark and unpleasant thoughts from her mind, from her dreams and also from her waking thoughts. The veil, the memories she had traversed, Remus and brother, Joseph Black. She's had a life before this. Cecilia lowered her head as a gust of rain and wind collided with her face and she silently screamed her frustration to the huge top blocks of the tower. She had done nothing so wrong to deserve such ill treatment, this Cecilia knew. However, she had been weakened by the love of Septimus and his love of her, to allow herself to be so. And then there were the memories of the place from which she had come. Her mind sought the magic, and she fought the usual fantasy that gave her hope when the walls of Durmstrang were pressing and the suffocating hopelessness crowding in on her, that was to run back to Septimus, take with her the perfect wolfspan recipe and traverse beyond the veil back to her home. Cecilia cast it aside and continued, through snippets of the cottage, Petunia Dursley's house, Hogwarts, to the night before her 29th birthday and her trip out to Hogsmeade. Hogsmeade. She had drunk butterbeer. And had become ill because of being in the presence of magic. And then it had stopped. And the effect wasn't as pronounced as it had been at Hogwarts either. Cecilia had noticed neither magical ability nor harmful effects. Cecilia crumpled her forehead. What did that tell her? It told her that the students at Hedgewoods were probably going to be alright if they remained at the school. It may look bad at the moment. Septimus had told her of Julian's symptoms of nausea and vomiting, drowsiness and lack of hunger, and she recalled when she had drunk butterbeer on her visit to Hogsmeade with Tunks, and how Snape had scolded her for it. It told her that ultimately conjurists were wrong, and some non-wizards too, that there was no distinct divide between those with magic and those without, that the influence of the environment played a role in determining the degree of magical ability alongside genetics. It told her that her mind was too confused, and that there was too much going on for her to think clearly. It told her that she needed to talk this through with someone so she could rationalize whatever was going on. Descending the stairs as she tried not to fall on the intermittent puddles that had formed on the steps adjacent the tower's windows, it occurred to Cecilia that she couldn't remember the last time she had thought anything positive about anyone. Sure, she remembered happy times, or rather remembered knowing that she had felt happy. Even the issue of Freya and the girl reading out her journal entries at the reciprocator meeting, Remus's face as she had begged Freya not to do it, the jeering and snubbing she had received to greater and lesser extents, seemed to be an inevitable conclusion to the situation of interloper Cecilia Jane Wells from the other place. Perhaps she even deserved it for being so strong-willed as to think that she could solve the problems with her Remus back there and going beyond the veil. Staying, she reflected as she reached the main hall of Durmstrang, had seemed to be impossible, given that she was being pursued by the Ministry and Death Eaters and that Remus had been put to death. However, what was there to say she was correct? Did she even know what was right anymore? To leave, that was what she wanted, Cecilia knew. To live her life quietly as Septimus's mum and Remus's wife. To be able to grieve over what had happened to her husband. Remus. The guilt her running away with Septimus began to eat away at her. Cecilia didn't even know whether her mind melded the two versions of her husband together. In the old place he had been put to death. Here, critically ill. She closed her eyes momentarily, giving up on wondering what her mind was telling her. Past scurrying school children Cecilia walked, blocking out any unwanted thoughts from her mind as the afternoon darkness enshrouded the castle as it grew, and Cecilia headed to the wooden door that led down to the classrooms. Ragnhild. If only she could find her one friend, to whom she could unburden her mind, like a dam of water, to release the pressure that was building to unbearability. Cecilia had felt like this before since arriving here, in this world. Remus here had listened, but she knew that she had probably contributed to pushing him away. Petunia sympathized and was good at soothing her, but it was practical, actionable advice Cecilia sought, something to stop her feeling so trapped. It was one reason why she had taken to documenting in meticulous detail all that she could for Cilius. Screwing up her eyes as she stood amongst the rows of wooden desks, she clenched her fists in anger. No one understood. And opened them, breathing, and forcing herself to become calmer and more in control. No one understood how she felt. Except one. Cecilia had to credit Cleus with the empathy he had shown her. He knew everything about her being there, about her life here. And he knew that unless she had a purpose she would be a danger to the ministry, to the reciprocators, to everyone. And it was Cecilia's mistake that she had supposed both Snape and Cleus did too. They always as if they did. Was that a mistake? On her part, then? Both had taken Aberforth's role and it was hard to believe they did not know what Cleus did. Aberforth had convinced Snape to make the potion for her. Snape hadn't really wanted to, and Cecilia suspects he was pleased that she had been reassigned by Cleus. That was, if he was not already pushing for it to happen. No. Cecilia stared at the frost-encrusted windows, white with ice and mist as the heat from the fire swiftly made its escape. Snape was not like that to work with. Not like her Snape, Severus Snape who existed in the other place. There was less damage to him emotionally, of course, it was different to say. Here, Snape had had his fair share of policing through the reciprocators, as well as being influential in the Hedgewood's classroom. He had verifying Harry's potion for her. Would he agree to her demand to collaborate again? Would Cleus even tell him? Not that she had needed it verified, for that world was gone in which contained a Harry that needed to fight Voldemort, but her overriding emotion was that it needed to be completed. For which they had used the Harry here for the fundamentals. Snape had used the Harry here to carry out the basic spells that she and the other Snape had postulated. It appeared to have gone well. The Snape here had even located enough of the rare plants and seeds that the potion had needed and patiently did it for her. But she would never know. He did not have the dubious fame of being attacked by the most powerful wizard of all time. The only thing she could do, which was what she did on a daily basis when uninvited thoughts took up residence in her mind, would be to test it there. Cecilia got to her feet and began to pace purposefully, around Ragnhild's domain, with sigils and books adorning the shelves by the fireplace, interspersed with tinned food that the witch had purloined from the kitchens, and Cecilia wondered absently whether she would still have the urge to hoard food in the winter if she worked in a warmer climate, or whether there was some sort of cultural genetic influence at work. She closed her eyes. Another hypothesis was forming in her mind, and she was beginning to fight the images as they were forming, of Severus Snape working with her, the Severus Snape from the old place. No. No. Cecilia hammered on her head as if to physically shake herself away from where she had originated. She had to let it go again. The happiest years she had ever had here, Cecilia knew, was when the old place hadn't crossed her mind at all. When she could just be herself at home, or at Hedgewood's. She sat down on one of the benches near the window. So, what could she do to help her case of dialogue regarding the enforced collaboration? How could she sell to either of them that communication was the way to go? Who would she have to convince the hardest? Snape? Or Cleus? Though performing the same role as head of the reciprocators, both wizards operated in different spheres, and ultimately Snape was a seeker of the truth of things. He rarely bought into politics, however beautifully packaged by Cleus, as if he was doing you a favor. Cecilia rose, for she could bear the cold no longer, and, approaching the fire, pointed her hands in the direction of the hearth, and the coals glowed a little. Here. It could be as painful here as there. Freya, whom she had always sought on Lithbest to give the orphaned girl, only to be thanked by her soul being bared spitefully, and the pain enhanced by that piece of work, as Petunia Dursley called her Henrietta Edwards, who had been seeing, or rather using, Sirius Black, and who, in Aberforth's wake, had ladder-climbed in Strasbourg. The woman had spoken to them one evening just before Freya's indiscretion, and had mentioned that Freya's parents would have been the first non-wizard reciprocators, ignoring the fact that Cecilia had been one for years. It was her own fault, Cecilia thought as she warmed her hands. She herself had been to blame. She had given Henrietta fuel, confided in her, trusted her. And the witch had just sat back watching as the circumstances began to consume Cecilia. She felt dampness on her face and realized that she was crying. A part of her, Cecilia knew, that was locked into her very heart, would do anything to go back. Before her reconciliation with Remus she had broken down, had begun to think of ways of ending it herself here. She had fantasized about ways she could get back to the old place, and how she might take Septimus with her. She had committed her years of work to the flames and watched as it curled in spirals in the flames. What good was magic, she had told herself, if she couldn't use it to help herself? Her ability was not as pronounced as before. But it hadn't stopped her from using it to her advantage. Small spells appeared to work, such as levitation, but not much, and Cecilia was minded to think of Petunia Dursley, who, unlike in the other place, was a fully fledged witch with magical training and learning. Her ability to empathize was as pronounced as the other Petunia Dursley, but Petunia here was ambivalent in its use, taking or leaving it as she might any skill, as it was needed. And the thought had occurred to Cecilia that could it be that you could learn to be a wizard, just as you might be able to unlearn if you had some magical ability? If you consciously rejected magic and chose to live in a non-wizard environment, would it physically wane? She hugged her knees close, as she sat near the hearth in Ragnhild's classroom, grubbying her clothes Polyflinder's style. She had broached the subject with Petunia and had agreed with her friend when she asked why she feel bad for her choice of life. Petunia was married to Regulus, and Dudley and Darren had plenty of magical ability. As a result, though it bothered her little, she had also been socially excluded by the reciprocators. Cecilia felt her eyes welling again as she thought of the situation, and the other situations in which she could do nothing. The images of the last few years began popping randomly into her mind as popcorn in a pan. Randomly and fleetingly, and then it dawned on Cecilia that the only way she could do anything was to act, to make everything she did her decision and not as a second-hand reaction to circumstances. There, that's made you happier. I am glad for it. Like a warm blanket against the coldness of her mind, Ragnhild's voice encompassed her. Cecilia looked up from her position, still prone by the fire, and felt her mental defenses yield. Ragnhild had an uncanny ability to make her feel happier, and, though the witch had precognitive foresight, right now Cecilia needed whatever comforting words she could get. You are punishing yourself, Cecilia, by denying your past. You shouldn't be so hard on yourself. You loved those who you have left behind, they are your future as well as your past. Cecilia felt her mouth fall open as she got to her feet. My room, it has an occlumency charm upon it, the tall, willowy witch continued. The thoughts of all within, should I be absent, are channeled directly to me. Students, usually, whose concerns are with charm studies. Past, present and future, Cecilia remarked, a smile on her lips, remembering how her friend's gift had prevented a falling masonry stone from hitting Cecilia from above as she knocked her out of the way with the spell only a few days before. Indeed so, the witch continued, and Cecilia noticed a pained look on her face momentarily before brightening. And with which of these states of time may I be of assistance to you, Cecilia Lupin? Cecilia smiled a little and then, like a burst dam, told Ragnhild about the things that were on her mind, from her family to Septimus, from her collaboration with Hedgewards when she first arrived, to her own wizarding abilities. The witch nodded empathetically as Cecilia continued. You can do magic, then? Of sorts. What do you suppose this means? As you infer, Ragnhild continued. You are predisposed, of course. Predisposed? Certainly. Ragnhild got to her feet and approached her shelves, moving the can of spam to one side as she withdrew a volume. It's complicated, genetically. Although I have no doubt you will grasp this. In general, yes, it is thought there are cases of magical influence that has an effect on non-magical objects, animals or people, to do with the environment in which they exist, Ragnhild clarified. You are a redhead, a pale one at that, strawberry blonde. She reached out and lifted Cecilia's hair, letting it fall back into place. What's that got to do with it? My original research into that very question was halted here, in Durmstrang, as those very questions that you are asking were beginning to emerge, so I was forced to abandon it and instead I chose another field of study. You've ginger hair, pale skin. Therefore it is very easy for your body to metabolize the energies in the range in which spells operate. And it has happened before? I was ill began Cecilia, breaking off suddenly. For the rest of the sentence ended, at Hogwarts. But you got better. That's interesting. Ragnhild looked ceilingwards as if thinking, before casting her eye on Cecilia again. From my observations, I expect you recovered faster than if you had not been predisposed. Cecilia's eyes widened. Scientific method. What was not to love about it? I first developed this hypothesis when I saw Icelanders who had been working with my husband sicken, and then recover. Those with red hair were far more ill, and once a short time had passed had, like you, found they could do magic. Ragnhild began to pace towards the fireplace slowly as if recalling a past time and place in her mind's eye. I began my research in this field some 20 years ago, but, as you can imagine, its subject, but it was deeply unpopular, such is the state of the school. My views were unheeded, and so instead shifted my research focus to. Instead, so changed the research to the disproportionate number of redheads being wizards. Cecilia found herself nodding, a clench of strain in her stomach easing a little in the company of her friend. Ragnhild had said that before, and as she rarely spoke to anyone for fear of the reactio she would encounter, and Cecilia felt honored. She was about to speak when Ragnhild turned to her sharply, fixing her with a glare. Then she averted her glare from Cecilia towards the fireplace, the walls, the door, shifting sporadically around as she spoke. I work here for Crystalia's sake. For her education, Ragnhild said, then glared back at Cecilia before her face softened. It pays well and I am good at it. She's doing well at Hedgewood's. Cecilia eyed Ragnhild carefully, half concerned at the woman's welfare, half wary. My seeing is my curse, Cecilia. I can do something credible here. But to be in Crystalia's sphere of life. Imagine, Ceci. Like an itch, building up in here. Ragnhild bunched up her long fingers into a ball and pushed it into her stomach, so that you can keep it hidden, which eventually drives truth-tellers mad. Or you can tell them, and risk people hating you. Ragnhild Anderson fell silent once more, her eyes resting on the window which was being dusted with ice and snow. Cecilia approached her tentatively, gently going to rest her hand on Ragnhild's shoulder, and she fully expected the witch to shake her off, but instead the witch rested her other on top, light as a feather, and continued to look down towards the icy sea. Children, all children, Ceci, think magic is fun, benign, and that any bad magic is dealt with using a woodcutter or magic seeds. That good magic helps crops to grow and old ladies with their housework. Few people have any notion of the power that magic can do. In such stories, whether for good or bad, the truth-teller is always doubted. The protagonist goes on to make their choices, and they lead to the correct foretelling in the end. The poor beggar girl marries the rich man's son because of the ring in the fish's stomach. Like fate. Fate is not a character in a story. Fate is tempted. Fate is denied. Fate is hated. Fate is never congratulated or made to feel welcome. She sighed, taking Cecilia's hand from her shoulder, and returning it to his side. And they read, or have read to them, mysterious mythology with its wood elves and pretty fairies, and no horror and terror at all, in case they get scared by it. Cecilia nodded as Ragnhild's cynicism increased. They have sanitized children's childhoods. Now the dolts in their fancy parliaments, with sheaves of paper and minutes from meetings, with sweeping divisions like just don't know what to do, too little, too late. And you hole up here, can't you do something? No. No one likes someone like me. What do I get? to see my worst fears come true? To whom do I say I told you so? What good is that? It doesn't feel good to see bad things happen and know that you can't do anything about them. I see things for what they are. That's good, then. No, Cecilia. No one listens, not properly, nor takes the time to understand. I will listen. No, it is not that. Ragnhild turned her face from the window and her perfect features crinkled into a smile. How would you feel if you could see the tower above you falling down, with children below it, their faces contorted with terror, bewilderment, disbelief? The tonnage killing most of them. I'd tell the head teacher, the caretaker. They find nothing. Then I would find an alternative classroom. There are none. And what reason do you give? That you have seen disaster that is to come, or do you make up some lie? You avoid disaster. But the classroom roof falls still. And it is not your students but those of the class that has swapped rooms. Then you try every option. There has to be a way. Cecilia looked around the classroom as her words echoed, their power strong and determined. Ragnhild shook her head sadly. You would think so, would you not? You could spend your life running around trying to avert disaster. You get a reputation as a fool, at best, or a lunatic at worst. And even if that were the price, it makes not the slightest difference to the outcome. Why do you think I stay here? There are few factors that can go wrong. There are few factors that my talent. Ragnhild sighed, my talent cannot penetrate. A perfectly sterile environment in which to educate future ministers of Europe. And then you came, with your kaleidoscope of possibilities. My mind has recently adjusted to the weight of interpretation. I have avoided you of late, Cecilia, and for that I am sorry. But why? Imagine a migraine, the pain of which you've never had before. As if my head is overloaded with premonitions, thoughts, feelings, images in my mind. Only here I can while away my time on a research project or two, keeping out of the way of people. Keeping myself well. It is such overloadings that have driven better truth-tellers into madness. Do you only see bad things? Bad things are a point of view. Ragnhild looked back out of the window again. But now, even here, the shield of the sea, and the sky and the walls, she hammered the palm of her hand against the glass, and walls, not even these can stop me from seeing what is to come. She turned to look intently at Cecilia. It's a curse, Sissy. Ragnhild looked at Cecilia imploringly, and Cecilia felt sympathetic tears spring to her eyes. Such a curse. I can never be free of it. Either can you. And my beloved Crystal Leah. She was at here. When I realized the implications I insisted she enrolled at Hedgewood's. She took her father's name and went. Her father was furious, as I knew he would be, but you can only do what you believe is right for your children. Of course we do, Cecilia found herself saying, as Septimus's face appeared in her mind's eye. And there is nothing that can be done about the attacks that are to come. Nothing that I can do to keep her safe. Oh, don't look like that, Sissy. The ministry is prepared. But they do not know when it will be. Cecilia felt her jaw fall open. What can you do? If the country's about to be attacked? What can I do? Do? Sissy, have you not been listening? What do you do if you know the future, Cecilia Lupin, and have no power to do anything about it? At this, Ragnhild's knees folded and she sank onto one of the benches that lay parallel to the chimney, designed for lack of comfort for maximum concentration. That is what I must abide now, Cecilia. Why can you not do something for her then? Cecilia sat next to the woman and made to put her hand onto hers, but Ragnhild pulled away furiously. Because it would make no difference. The usually cool demeanor of Ragnhild Anderson was replaced with contempt. Crystal Leah, my daughter, is involved, as are we all, and her destination is the same. no matter which her path. If I had a choice I would be with her. But I am a truth-teller, Cecilia Lupin, and so many times I have thought that fact didn't matter, and every time someone I love be hurt because of my presence. But you can. She turned and looked Cecilia in the eye. You could go. There's nothing stopping you. You've come down here to weep to me when instead you should be gone and with your family. The woman's screamed words seemed to engulf Cecilia and she took a step back. Why don't you go? Leave this place. I'm needed here, began Cecilia, but Ragnhild hushed her. You are not. What is it that you think this place will give you? The cure for my husband. Cecilia shot back. She'd already sent the old magic information back and she was, in her position, in a key place that may yield something that Snape may miss. Out of the corner of her eye she saw Ragnhild turn towards the window and watch as the snow wisped down again. Folding her arms, she turned too, her own gaze taking in the fireplace. Cecilia pictured her son, for whom she was also at derm strength to shield him from harm. But, who was to say that was the right thing to do? I just want to be with Septimus, Cecilia thought to herself. And he wants me to be there. Be with my family, and forget about work. But then could developing a vampire potion be what I should be doing, so that whatever the outcome for Remus, they could make their lives together? A new image, of herself with a modicum of magical ability with Severus Snape, striving to help her husband appeared in her mind and, through the mire of her dark emotions a pinprick of light. If I were free of my seeing I would be with my daughter. Ragnhild continued to address the window. I would not choose to be here. Ragnhild's clipped words hung in the air between them as Cecilia turned to look at her friend. Ragnhild turned too, and smiled feebly. You have strength, Ceci, that you cannot see in yourself. Call Julius Lupin out on his word, you may find he has fewer choices than he thinks. In my name, who cannot do those things? Cecilia looked at Ragnhild's face. The woman, whose features to her always looked youthful were, at once, transformed into the cares of the world. She took the witch's delicate hand and nodded. Will you promise me? Yes. Yes. I will find a way. Somehow, I will find a way. If it meant Cleus was the enemy again, so she could summon her courage, she would. She would see her son again and her life with Remus and their son would continue once more. Collaborating with Snape on a cure for Remus. The women sat in silence for a time, wrapped in their own lives as the bustle of the school continued overhead. 88,888,888. In the darkness of the corridor that led underground from the Quidditch house, stow of equipment, brooms, hoops and balls, Fraser Blewit's self-satisfaction beamed from his face and lips. Clever. How was it that the height and mighty, goody two-shoes kid would ever know it was him? He hated being in detention. It was so humiliating. He was a Newt student, for Merlin's sake. What did they think they were doing? It had been the wandering of his mind after overhearing students talking about the midterm Quidditch friendlies, that the students could test out their flying skills and display their talents, that had got him plotting. He had to get to the Quidditch stores and back, unseen, that was the key. And the lock? Still grinning to himself, Fraser Blewit enjoyed the mental feast of the magical destruction that was to occur the next day and the even more enjoyable set of after-events. It also occurred to him, as he leaned against the corridor wall, fate heaven if he'd gone back now its fate was sealed. There was nothing anyone could do now that would undo what he had put in place. It would serve that stupid boy whose friend he would so like to have murdered in the hospital wing these last few days. And he would be right at the front for the performance of Sam Potter's life. Or rather. In the dark, Fraser's eyes flashed black as the spell he'd used jostled for space amongst the others jostled for position in his brain. All magic. He began to get moving again, The illegal spell would have worn off if he was much longer, and he wasn't prepared to get caught again. It was convenient that his father knew people who could teach him the old magic they knew and also the means to shield their use from the ministry. Who would have guessed that the school's own policy of limits on the portable pensives would give him easy means by which to protect himself? It was vital, of course, for conjurists who were taking part in the action that would happen very soon. As he picked up the pace, Bluewit's mind pictured Sam Potter's face as his spell, before the whole school, destroyed Septimus Lupin's lightning shot with not one clue as to how it had happened.